My novel, The Seance, is a suspense novel set in late Victorian England, and it begins with the story of the heroine, Constance Langton, whose younger sister dies when she's very small, and her mother is plunged into inconsolable grief. Constance's father is very remote, and so she grows up really estranged from both her parents, and consequently comes to believe that perhaps she isn't her parents' child after all. As she grows older, she comes to wonder if she could conjure up the ghost of her dead sister, and if that would bring her mother out of her haze of grief in which she's lived ever since Alma, the younger sister, died. And so Constance takes to staging seances for her mother with tragic consequences. And then she finds out that she is to inherit a crumbling mansion in Suffolk called Raxford Hall. And with this inheritance comes a packet of papers, and these contain the two narratives of the two other central characters, which draw her back into the Raxford mystery, the heart of the novel, the disappearance of a family 20 years before Constance's time. But to solve her own mystery, she's got to solve that one, and so she's drawn further and further into the darkness at the heart of Raxford Hall. I think anyone now who sits down to write a horror or ghost or a mystery tale, whether they know it or not, is going to be drawing on one or another strand of Victorian of 19th century writing, because that's the cradle of mystery writing. It begins really with Edgar Allan Poe, with Dickens, with Wilkie Collins, all of whom were wonderful mystery writers. It is the late 19th century is the great time of the classic ghost story. And of course the Gothic horror story also descends absolutely from the 19th century, coming down from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein through Sheridan Le Fanu, of course Dracula. No matter what you're doing in horror or mystery, your ancestors, your Victorian ancestors, are looking over your shoulder. They're the origin, the fountain. That's where it all begins and comes from. There are a lot of stereotypes of Victorian society which in my fiction I like to play against, particularly in my female characters. The sort of stereotypical middle-class Victorian woman is a shrinking violet, very much confined to the hearth, very much looking up to the men around her. But real Victorian women were much more varied and often much more feisty than that. And my two female characters are very much the two strongest characters in the book, certainly morally speaking, and in terms of their determination to see wrongs righted and injustices pursued. I like doing female characters because they're definitively not me, and it's very rewarding to inhabit a character where you have to imagine every step of the way. And in trying to inhabit my female characters and feel as they do, I enjoy the challenge of that, and I find it very rewarding, particularly working with strong women like the two in this novel. And a great compliment a reader paid to me some time ago was when she said, "I think you channel women better than you channel men," and I was delighted with that. The Victorian fascination with seances grows out of the great yearning which arises in the latter part of the century for proof of survival after death, which has a great deal to do with religious doubt with a capital D, and the huge pace of change in all areas of Victorian life. And the spiritualist movement came out of nowhere around about 1850, and by 25 years later there were 100,000 believing spiritualists in England. And where you have a movement on that scale, you're also going to have a lot of people exploiting it. And the technology of Victorian seances grew at a remarkable rate until professional mediums had whole houses fitted out so that they could perform the most extraordinary feats of raising the dead. The Victorian era is also a great era of stage magic, And some of the great professional mediums were in effect stage magicians working on a different stage. But there was also that small residue of strange, unexplained events, as there are in individual lives, that little core of things that couldn't be easily explained away, which kept people coming back to the seance room. And my novel is very much about that borderland where you're pretty sure you don't believe, but you're not quite certain. And that's the world into which my characters are drawn.